we would hold it open until 4:15, 15 minutes after. My guess is there'll be a few comments and short discussion.
Yeah.
And the mic is on, so.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to start. Okay.
Are we live, Natalie? Okay, we're live.
I'd like to call to order the public hearing pursuant to General Municipal Law, the Ulster County Industrial Agency. This hearing is proposed amendments to the Uniform Tax Exemption Policy. The date today is October 8th, 2024. The time is 4:01 p.m. The location is the Ulster County Office Building, Legislative Chambers, 6th floor, located at 244 Fair Street in the city of Kingston, Ulster County, New York. At this time, I'd like to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The mission statement of the agency is as follows. The mission of the Ulster County Industrial Development Agency is to advance the job opportunities, general prosperity, and long-term economic vitality of Ulster County residents by targeting tax incentives, bonds, and other assistance to foster creation and attraction of new business and the retention and expansion of existing businesses. This time, I'd like to introduce some of our members up front here. To the right of me, I have Hillary Nichols, our Executive Director, and to the left, I have Chris Canada, who is counsel to the IDA and administrative assistant. Yeah. What'd you say? I know.
Oh.
I was going to say Natalie. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I was like, what? I'm partially deaf. So good evening. My name is Michael Ham. I'm the chair of the Ulster County Industrial Development Agency. I'm also the hearing officer for this public hearing. And we're holding this public hearing to solicit comments on the proposed review and potential amendments to the agency's UTEP, Uniform Tax Exempt Policy. I would like to note that as required by New York State law, the agency is live streaming this public hearing. Christopher Canada of Hodgkin Russ, LLP, counsel to the agency, will provide the purpose of the public hearing, the agency's legal authority to hold this public hearing, and the agency's next steps. Once Chris is finished, I will then open up this public hearing for comments. Chris?
Thank you, Mike. The provisions of Chapter 1030 of the laws of 1969 of New York, constituting Title I of Article 18A of the General Municipal Law, Chapter 24 of the Consolidated Laws of New York as amended, and Chapter 787 of the 1976 laws of the State of New York as amended, codified as Section 293 of said General Municipal Law, authorize the agency to promote, develop, encourage, and assist in the acquiring, constructing, reconstructing, improving, maintaining, and equipping and furnishing of manufacturing, warehousing, research, commercial, and industrial facilities, among others. Section 858 of this legislation and act further authorizes the agency to make certain appointments and approve certain administrative matters. Pursuant to Section 874 of the Act, the agency has established the policy which is applicable to the provision of any financial assistance to any project. The agency has undertaken a review of the policy and is considering amending the policy. Pursuant to Section 874(4) of the Act, the agency is required to solicit input from the affected tax jurisdictions regarding the adoption of a uniform tax exemption policy. Therefore, by resolution adopted by the members of the agency on September 18, 2024, the agency authorized the holding of this public hearing to solicit such input. Pursuant to that public hearing resolution, the executive director of the agency caused notice of this public hearing to be A, mailed on September 25, 2024 to the chief executive officers of each affected tax jurisdiction, identified on Schedule A to this script, and to be inserted in the record. B, published on September 20, 2024 in the Daily Freeman, a newspaper of general circulation available to the residents of Ulster County, New York. And C, posted on September 25, 2024 on the agency's website and in a public bulletin board located at the Ulster County Office Building, Legislative Chambers, 6th floor, located at 244 Fair Street in the city of Kingston, Ulster County, New York. Proposed amendments to the policy were included as part of the notice of this public hearing mailed to the affected tax jurisdictions previously referenced. Additionally, the executive director of the agency mailed the public hearing resolution to the affected tax jurisdictions on September 25, 2024. Copies of the notice of this public hearing and the proposed amendments to the policy are available at the front of the room. We have made arrangements for a stenographer to be present in order to accurately make a record of these any public comments. The purpose of this public hearing is to solicit input with respect to the amendments to the policy. We are not here to answer questions, although in the course of the hearing, we will consider questions if we have the information to answer those questions and there is sufficient time to answer such questions. As previously noted, copies of the public notice of public hearing and the proposed amendments to the policy are available in this room. Now, unless there is any objection, I'm going to suggest waiving the full reading of the notice of this public hearing and instead request that the full text of the notice of the public hearing be inserted into the record of this public hearing. The agency will consider the amendments to the policy at a subsequent meeting of the agency currently scheduled for November 20th, 2024 at 9 a.m. And at such meeting, the agency will also consider the comments received at this public hearing. Such meeting, like all meetings of the agency, are open to the general public. The notice of this public hearing indicated that written comments could be addressed to Hillary Nichols, Executive Director. At this time, the agency has not received written comments from any of the affected taxing jurisdictions. We will keep the comment period open until 5 p.m. on Thursday, October 10th, 2024. Any comments received by such time will be included in the record to be considered by the agency. I will now return the floor to Mike for purposes of recognizing any citizens in attendance wishing to make a public comment.
Thank you, Chris. So is there any remarks by the affecting taxing jurisdictions? Any remarks by the affecting taxing jurisdictions? Okay. And then I open the public hearing to the floor for comments. I will now open the public hearing floor for comments. It is now 4:07 p.m. By the way of operating rules, if you wish to make a public comment, please raise your hand. I will call on you. Please wait to be recognized. Once recognized, please stand and state your name and address for the record. There's not a lot of people here, so usually I like to limit it to 3 minutes, okay? But if you have something to say, we're more than willing to hear it. So I'll open the floor now for public hearing. Anybody?
Okay.
Dennis Doyle.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I'll.
Sure.
Thank
Here,
you.
there.
My name is Dennis Doyle, for the record. I am the planning director of Ulster County. I've served in that position for longer than I care to mention. But the reason I'm here today is the county planning department has been charged by the county legislature to essentially try to jumpstart and incentivize the construction of housing, particularly affordable housing within the county. We've created a housing smart communities program relative to that, so that we're working with municipalities to change their zoning statutes and to streamline their approval processes as it relates to housing. We've also worked with the county legislature and the county executive to create something called a housing action plan and a housing action fund. It operates as a specialized fund under the county's fund balance. We have the legislature has agreed to put $15 million in that particular pot of money to allow us to essentially move forward with respect to affordable housing. We've issued a notice of funding availability for that, for those projects, with an anticipation that we would award somewhere in the neighborhood of about $3 million on an annualized basis to encourage the creation of affordable housing. We work with the legislature to pass a local law, because housing, believe it or not, is not a county purpose. The county did pass a local law making housing a county purpose. It defined what affordable housing was as it relates to that. And we are now in the process of working with the legislature. They have just approved $2 million worth of funding for various housing projects throughout the county. In so doing, we believe that we will incentivize the construction of over 250 units within the county. And what we would like to talk about today is some of the technical issues associated with the proposed amendments to the UTEP, how they fit in with other county programs, how they fit in with taxing jurisdictions as associated with low-income housing tax credits, how they fit in with respect to some of the communities that already have inclusionary zoning that requires developers to essentially build affordable housing, and also how to think about what we would deal with in terms of defining what the term affordable housing means. So with that, I would offer a couple of technical discussions with respect to the proposed changes. And I know that, I'm glad the county executive's here. I would like to yield my time, if I may, to the county executives and let her go over the broader discussions, and I'll come back and talk to you about some of the technical issues associated with this.
Well, with no objection, I would like to recognize the county executive, Jen Mestre.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So I guess first I want to start off by thanking you for taking up housing, because I do think it is an appropriate thing for the IDA to be focused on. I have a few, sorry, I took the stairs. I'm getting my breath back. I have just a few points I'd like to make regarding the proposed policy. First off, there's obviously a huge demand for housing, that the market can meet the demand for market rate housing. But what we really need is housing that our workforce can afford. So I think it's really important to design the incentives to encourage as deep a level of affordability as possible. I don't think it makes sense to offer incentives for, say, a percentage of units that's already required by law under local statute, zoning statute. So it should really be, from my perspective, designed to kind of incentivize an increase in the number of units that are affordable beyond what is already required. It's very important to have a clear definition of affordability. And I want to just note, you may have noted this already, that
I was doing a long introduction.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. What is, rents for folks at 80% AMI is above what the market, what you can get right now on the market. So it really has to be designed with what, geared toward what our workforce can actually afford today. So I think I've hit on most of my points. I feel that at least 60% AMI is really hitting that. Whether you're having, I guess suppose you have multiple kind of thresholds. Affordable housing, workforce housing, but workforce housing and affordable housing, you're hitting the same people, but there may be a bigger rate, a larger range for workforce housing, 80%, maybe up to 100% AMI. I also want to just touch on the you have provisions, I guess you've had longstanding provisions for sustainability or green building. Mm-hmm. So you referenced EPA green building standards. EPA doesn't have green building standards. They have a list of green building standards that exist. And I want to encourage you to think about using HCR's sustainability standards, which is what we use. It's actually the requirement for funding through our Housing Action Fund. It's a great set of standards. It's totally meetable. So just putting that out there as well. And have I missed anything?
No, you can keep going. I can add to your list.
Let's see. Okay. One other point. So I think, under your policy now, the period for affordability is required to be 10 years. But I guess the value of the tax abatement really would enable that time frame to be 20 years, which would make more sense as well for the residents to live there. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll let these guys take over. But those are some of my suggestions.
Dennis, would you
Thank
like
you.
to?
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to yield my time. I want to echo the exec's comments with respect to the appropriateness and appreciation with respect to the IDA taking up the housing policy document and putting something forth. We think that the IDA has a role to play, both in terms of the affordability of housing, but also the creation of housing in terms of its interactions with its business community. I want to also echo the idea that the affordability question is one that, in my mind, needs to be tied to the type of jobs that you're creating. If you're basically incentivizing the creation of jobs that can't afford the housing that you're also incentivizing, you've created a mismatch with respect to what happens in terms of the ability for us to attract a workforce and keep a workforce, while at the same time we're experiencing drastic shortages in affordable housing. I would also echo the exec's comments relative to our ability to essentially for the market to respond. Since 2019, the county planning office, through its review of local zoning changes and projects, we've seen over 3,000 housing units be proposed in this county, some of which are under construction, some of which are going through the approval process, some of which have been approved. So the market has responded. The question of affordability then remains. Housing projects that are opening in this county right now have starting rents in the neighborhood between $2,400 to $2,800 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. Those are literally not affordable for those folks in Ulster County for any of the job descriptions that you're starting to think about in terms of what you incentivize. So we've also seen, I think, tying some of these affordability issues to percentages of AMI, particularly at the 80% level, is extremely difficult, mainly because it drives numbers in terms of the rents that can be charged that are above market rate rents. The executive did mention that. I also want to go back and say we've had a 40% increase in AMI in the last 4 years, which is driving some of these numbers. As we look at trying to provide for workforce housing, we actually may be creating a market and driving a market to a different level rather than driving the market down and creating competition for affordable housing or competition for housing itself. So while you do provide essentially tax advantages to the market rate portion of the housing, given where we're seeing these numbers go, you actually may be driving a different discussion relative to what affordability means. You need to be careful of that. The other thing I would say to you is we've seen no information behind this work that essentially takes a project and moves it through the process and says, what do the numbers mean? It sort of seems to say that we haven't seen a project run through an analysis to say, does the current proposed changes make sense for a project penciling out, and how does it make sense? We took a look at some of the numbers and ran them through what we would think would be a typical project, and what we found, at least what we think we found, is that the amount of tax incentives would be greater towards the market rate units than it would be towards the affordable units. I would also want to think about the idea of how long the affordability period lasts. The affordability period is tied to the pilot period, which changes from 10 years to a maximum of 15 years. When we look at that affordability period over that time frame, that matches none of the affordability periods that we're having discussions about at the local level or that's in the county's Housing Action Fund program. So even on low-income housing tax credit programs, the minimum affordability is 30 years. Under the county's Housing Action Fund, it's 50 years. And under most municipal programs, it actually lasts in perpetuity. So you need to think about the idea of what happens to those affordable units at the end of 10 years and those people that are in those affordable units. We provided in the NOFA, and I would urge you to look at that NOFA, we provided in that NOFA the ability to essentially allow for tax rent increases maximized at a 5% per year level. So when you start to think about when your affordability runs out, you need to think about, is there a way that we can extend those tax breaks so that we guarantee affordability on a longer term? Clearly, the idea with respect to some pilots is they actually extinguish. In some instances, with respect to housing, will always need a supply of affordable housing, and some of these developers will always need essentially the ability to talk about having that affordability and having a pilot in place that looks at affordability in the longer term. I would also tell you that one of the common complaints we hear from housing developers has to do with essentially what a project can pay over time versus what the project income is. So tying this to income is also something that you should start to think about and look at in terms of that. There are some things I would like to talk about that are technical in nature. Some of those have to do with the example that the executive used as it relates to EPA. Clearly, the EPA language in the point matrix is misplaced, and we need to think about what replaces that in terms of sustainability. The idea of using HCR sustainability is something that makes a lot of sense. The other thing that you use, which is I believe is going to be carried over from your existing UTEP, is the idea of distressed communities. The distressed community calculations are based on both unemployment as well as income, with the idea that in order to be a distressed community, you have to have an unemployment rate, I believe that's 1.5 times the average unemployment rate. I would challenge anyone to do a quick look at the communities in Ulster County and find out which communities would be eligible as distressed communities in Ulster County. I would also say that unemployment rate is not related to the need for housing. And one of the things that you should think about using is using disadvantaged communities, which are regularly looked at the state level. They include things that are poverty rates, unemployment rates, and others, but it doesn't have a qualifier that it has to be substantially more unemployment than other areas around it. So moving to look at poverty, either if you look at distressed communities, basically on a poverty level, the number of percentage of people in poverty, distressed communities are defined as more than 20% of the community is in poverty level. That gives you a sense of what the idea is as it relates to the need for affordable housing in those communities. So looking at that rather than using the current what I believe will be the current analysis in terms of whether or not you're going to be eligible under that first section of eligibility, I think moving that to a different discussion point would be appropriate. Last but not least, your current UTEP has policies in it with respect to workforce housing and senior housing. There's no indication with respect to how this matrix will affect the current UTEP. No indication whether those portions of the UTEP that were already adopted will continue, or whether or not they will be amended and folding into this work. Those are inconsistencies we think that need to be cleared up before this is active. I would ask that one of the things that you do is look at how your policies interact with the other policies that are out there at the county level and other policies that are out there at the state level, and certainly the idea of what's out there at community levels in terms of what's required. In order to do that, my suggestion would be it may be appropriate to pause, rethink, and then come out and do this one more time. You have the absolute support of essentially the county planning department relative to making sure that there is a role for IDA in the housing work that's being done. And there's a role for IDA in terms of incentivizing pilots and incentivizing housing construction. We're particularly pleased to see your efforts with respect to mixed use development and providing the pilots for that work as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dennis. County Exec, anything to follow up?
Only that there's another, in addition, you mentioned the disadvantaged communities map, which is was created under the state climate law, but there's also, I don't have the name with me right now, but there's another index, social index.
Environmental justice?
No, it's a social index that just better accounts for rural communities like Ulster, because it's skewed a little bit, disadvantaged communities map toward more urban areas.
The current disadvantaged communities, just looking at it, Kingston is obviously a disadvantaged community, Ellenville, New Paltz, Shandaken. As you move down the Hudson River Valley, you also see parts of Lloyd, and that work is as well. So some of this is done on a census tract basis, some of it is done on a community basis, a municipal boundary basis. But the thought I want to leave with you is poverty is probably more important than unemployment in this instance, well, with respect to housing.
Is there anyone else with public comment? Okay, I will conclude the public comment period for right now. A record of this public hearing will be prepared and reviewed by the members of the agency in the connection with the agency's consideration of amendments to the policy. Again, this public hearing was to solicit public comment and consider the questions. If we have any information, any answers, we'll reach out to you, Dennis, obviously, and to you, Jen, moving ahead through Hillary, our executive director. Once again, does anyone else have anything for comment at public hearing? Nothing. Okay. For the record, please state, I'd like to state that we are now going to close the public hearing, the formal closing of the public hearing. So no further comments. The public hearing is now closed at precisely 4:27 p.m.